Okay, compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. We are pleased to have Karen Lopez with us here today. Karen, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I have opinions.
Yes, indeed. And we are going to get to there.
About time someone on the show did.
Yeah, that's right. We are going to get there. So what we got? So the topic or our session title today, not session, episode title is 10 things you need to know about data security. And so Karen's going to rapid fire these, and we'll wait with a bated breath as we get there. But first, we do have a couple of things we want to get to. So as always, compañeros, our show notes are going to be at SQLDataPartners.com/data security, all one word, obviously, or SQLDataPartners.com/212 for today's episode. Now, for a little SQL Server in the news. So before we hit the record button, and I'm not sure, we weren't sure we were going to get another episode in 2020. And Karen stepped in and she was like, I'd like to be the last.
Saving the best for last.
Yeah, save the best for last. That's right. And so we were able to get together, but this is obviously kind of a slow time. Eugene mentioned, right, the time between Christmas and New Year's often is pretty slow, that last week of the year. And so the same can be said from SQL Server, the SQL Server front, right? There's not a whole lot of information there. Because we have been talking about it earlier, I will say that Microsoft has announced, we've been talking about paths and what happened with the user groups and accounts and things like that. And there are lots of things that still need to be decided. However, Microsoft has announced they're going to make Teams available, surprise, surprise, for user groups, and you have to go through the process. The link sends me to a survey. So that's as much as I know in terms of how to get it started there. I guess, does anybody else know? User group leaders, have they given you more information, or do you have additional details we can pass along perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't Team for free for the world now?
They're also covering Meetup Pro or Premium.
Oh, that's really nice.
So that is something that costs money. This isn't like the long con of like, how do we get more people to use Teams?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of Teams. I use it all day long with a couple of organizations, but it's really interesting that because I was the Toronto SQL Server user group leader for a few years. And, we paid for Meetup Pro because that was a great way of getting in front of people in the local community. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I hear that all the time, that like it's just a huge kind of marketing inflow of like people are actually on Meetup looking for events. And so that can be a great way to find people who maybe like don't even know that user groups are a regular thing.
Exactly. I'd have meetings where more than half of the attendees were people who found us through Meetup Pro. So that's really great.
Okay, so I feel like I've been out of the loop there for a little while, right? I thought you always had to pay for Meetup, right? So what's the pro give you?
Yeah, so basically you would sign up for Meetup if Carlos had SQL Trail Meetup.
Okay.
You pay for that. In the US, that's currently about $90 every 6 months. I believe the price is going up again, or it just went up again, one of the two. And you get to start up to 3 groups. So you could have SQL Trail, you could have Carlos's SQL Cycling, you could also have a kayaking group that's completely unrelated. But you get to host up to 3 groups with your account. Meetup Pro is run by an organization. So for example, at Microsoft, they have the same thing on the .NET side. They're doing this on the data platform side, where you can associate your organization with Meetup Pro with say Microsoft here. They cover the cost of the Meetup subscription, and you are an affiliate of or a member of this parent organization.
Got you. Okay, that makes more sense.
So the important there being it's free.
There you go. Yeah. So Microsoft's ultimately covering it for it, then you get to affiliate, right? So,
Yeah.
very similar to the model that we were using previously, if you will. Okay, very good. So that's some good news there for user group leaders. We also have a couple of shout outs, right? We want to give a shout out to Thomas Wilson, Mimo220. There you go. Thanks, Mimo. Stephanie Bruno, Rob Volk from Atlanta. I haven't heard from Rob in a hot minute, so thanks for giving the podcast a little love. Sarah Reyes, Duane Ferreria. Must be
I should be
Italian.
able to say that.
Ferreria. And Kevin Arnold. So you can see my old age. I'm having to get closer to the monitor. I'm like, what is that? So thank you, compañeros, for interacting with us on social media, connecting with us. We do appreciate the love. Okay, let's see. I don't know that I can.
Carlos is being asked to turn up the volume on himself.
That's
also,
right.
if you get a chance, can you have it so my face isn't like the entire quadrant?
Oh,
I'm a little zoomed in compared to everybody else.
Legally speaking, that is the Eugene quadrant.
I think technically that puts me at like the up and comer part of the Gartner.
Well,
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. So we'll see. Okay, so Karen, we want to get your hot take, maybe not so hot take, on what you think we need to know about data security, right? So we're like Fort Knox around here.
Yeah, and we've got like 4 hours to talk about it, right?
Yeah, that's right. I might have to leave for a moment, but the show must go on, as they say, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I just have these 10 things that I think, these are my personal opinions and rants, and just a little bit background on me. My background is as a data architect. So I started my career, well, I say 20 plus years ago, but that just means I stopped counting at 20. Because my entire career has been around data architectures and data management. Prior to joining, like using SQL Server and things, like I've never been a DBA. I've been an accidental DBA several times, but I consider myself a data architect. And my background is methodologies. Like I started during the heydays of those large 400 volume methodologies from big companies. And I started my career in the US Department of Defense, which was really big on methods and methodology, and sometimes good at security. But I've kind of built up these 10 things as things that I believe in because I love my data. I want to protect data. Some people want to protect networks and applications, which is the first level of defense, like the layers of security.
Sure.
But I'll start with one of them. And the reason I'm bringing up privacy with security is Microsoft in their documentation, in their release notes, bundles these two things together. So I'll talk a little bit that security and privacy are different things, but very much related. So I see security as protecting the integrity of the data and all the systems around that data. I see privacy as ensuring that data is only used for specific uses that the owners, meaning the actual people the data is about, have consented to that use, understand how it's used, understand how it's combined with other things, and ensuring different things like the right to be forgotten or the right to see their own data. So those are really two different things. However, you can't ensure the privacy of the data if you don't have security of it. And if you don't have security, if you don't have sufficient security, you're going to be in violation of a lot of privacy acts or even consumer goodwill about your data and how you protect it. But I'd also say that while privacy is normally about individuals, I think we could take those same things about even system data, right?
Sure.
So for instance,
Well, so that's where, so I guess.
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
jump in there for a second, right? So that
Yeah.
is where, so I don't know if it gets, for the mere mortals, perhaps, right? We can get, mushy there really quickly.
yeah,
But I think that the distinctions are good. But they do kind of go so hand in hand that generally, well, if your job is not dependent on it, if your job responsibility is not, in with that data security, if you will, or privacy, right, then you would kind of, I think a lot of folks would just bundle them together. But
yes.
for us who are kind of in the minutia, right, then I think it makes sense
Yeah,
to.
yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring up that other thing. The other one concept I want to add to this point is that privacy isn't secrecy, right? So meaning that, people will say, there's no more privacy, get over it. The thing is, you could take something like my email address. My email address is plastered everywhere because I'm a consultant. I want people to be able to contact me. I want all the people on LinkedIn who've linked with me to definitely reach out. I am a very open person with the way I use social media. My whole life's out there. But that doesn't mean I don't think that I don't require privacy. It means if I give you my email address, you can't sell it to somebody else or give it to somebody else because I gave it to you for this reason,
Sure.
right? And so people confuse privacy with secrecy. They think of how they draw the blinds on their windows for privacy purposes. But it's from a data point of view, a data architecture point of view, those are three things: security, privacy, and secrecy, right?
Yeah.
And so as I talk today, having said all those warnings, I might just say security when I'm talking about all these topics, just because I don't want to say security, privacy, and secrecy, right? So that's that. I think that security should be by design. And I've stolen that phrase from a colleague of mine who used to be a privacy commissioner here in Ontario, and now she has her own consulting business. But what I mean is it shouldn't be an afterthought. Like, even if you're using minimum viable product, lean development, agile, it's not a phase 2, it's not a 2.0 thing, is that we in the data world need to think about designing in security and privacy as soon as we start designing. And I find that it's often seen as a phase 2 thing.
Sure.
Has that been your experiences?
Oh yeah, because it's
that seems pretty reasonable. Yeah.
Not part of the critical path, right? It's like, we don't necessarily, we don't need that, right, to show people, and
Yeah.
Well,
questions they're gonna ask.
I think part of the problem is that a lot of times when we're thinking about this stuff, it's a lot easier whenever like you're building a house and you're like, well, there's only so many holes that we need to make sure there's windows or doors or whatever on. But a lot of times the whole thing, like you talked about with privacy, is a lot more of like, okay, getting phone number tattooed and used somewhere, right? Like, it's a or something like that. And so the problem is that the security service, the threat surface, could be much broader than anyone anticipates. If you're
like one of the things I mentioned about privacy is that in most jurisdictions, I'd say outside the US, in most jurisdictions, not only do you have to get a consumer's consent, you have to record that consent, right? And when we design systems and we're collecting this personal identifiable information about people, do we automatically design in the features, the tables in the database, or the documents we're going to store, or anything like that to record the consent? So I'm helping an organization right now who has never recorded consent and therefore can barely use any of their data that they've collected over 30 years, because even though they collect, there could be a legal argument that when the data was collected in the 70s, there were no privacy laws, so they didn't have to record that consent. But they don't even know when that data was collected. So if they collected it last week, the privacy legislation still applies, but And they believe they got consent because it was on a web form and they were required to check a box before the account could be created, but they didn't record it. So what are they going to do? Like, think about this. This one little feature could stop someone from leveraging the data in the way their competitors are doing. So one of my other assertions is that good security and privacy is a fantastic competitive advantage, right? Compared to the businesses that you might be competing with, because generally we all kind of know this. It's not our companies or our clients, but it's everyone else's that is really bad at security and privacy, right?
Yeah, but the challenge I think always is that so like insurance, it's only valuable when there's a breach, right? or there's an attempted breach.
Sure.
Now, you can make the argument that everybody's trying to get into your data all the time.
Yep.
Right. So it's, we're going to assume perhaps that, that someone's trying to get in, and unless you hear otherwise, we're taking care of it. But it does seem like a challenge to sell that one sometimes.
Yeah.
And only care unless there's a problem, right?
I think that's changing though with as the regulatory environment changes, right? So I think that would be 100% true 10 years ago. But now that we need to be like, oh crap, I need to get a checkbox for GDPR. And just because they're coming from a US or IP address doesn't mean anything, because they could be a UK citizen that lives in Pennsylvania. And so now I'm still legally obligated to respect their rights or whatever.
You may be, right?
Yeah.
It's all complex. So one of the things I say in my data architecture presentations is the world is a lot more complex than you think it is. And if you want my data model, my database design to be simple, you need to first go out and make the world simple and then come back to me. So like that specific example you gave, yes, GDPR applies to European citizens, but there's all these gray areas. What if they're in the US? What if they're in Europe, but it was one of your sales professionals that collected their business card while they were in Europe? Then typically that regulation might apply, but it might not apply if they signed in from it might not even apply if they signed in from Europe, but they weren't responding to one of your email blasts. Like it's not simple, right?
Sure.
So my advice to most companies is follow GDPR like practices, and then you don't have to worry about whether you're compliant. And the other thing is, of course, the world's changed since GDPR came out. So California has privacy laws. Canada's had one for more than a decade, but we are changing it to make it more like GDPR. Like it's just going to happen. The US has always been sort of the outsider for a lot of these federal level regulations for all kinds of political reasons that I won't get into. But what we have in the US are sector-based privacy laws, right? The financial ones, the children, HIPAA. And the funny thing is, like HIPAA is really important, right? Protecting health information, some of the most sensitive information that you want to not just keep private, but you probably also want it to be secret a lot of times. You don't want people knowing about certain things. The interesting thing is, I was an expert witness at a court case recently, and people were suing, a health organization was suing a software provider because they misunderstood some things. And anyway, got confusing. But they were all having to be HIPAA compliant. And when I met with them, they each handed me a thumb drive with a backup of all their health information databases with no encryption and no password. And I just kind of sat there and I said, don't give this to me. Do not give this to me. And both sides said, we don't have any way of encrypting it. And this came from their IT orgs, right?
Sure.
And I'm saying, of course you have ways of encrypting it. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're in the midst of a court case about privacy and security. And you both just showed me you don't know anything about it. And they refused. So I took those thumb drives, went back to my hotel room, encrypted them, and then I could barely sleep at night for fear I would lose the thumb drives. And I didn't want to put it on my machine. I didn't want that data. That was scary.
It is scary and that is the unfortunate thing. So we have done quite a bit of work in the healthcare space as well.
Mm.
And unfortunately, HIPAA is a checkbox.
Yeah.
Are we HIPAA compliant? Yes, we are. And they're constantly sending me like spreadsheets of stuff.
Yes.
And it's just like, look, like, so our policy is we do not download customer data.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, I can't, like, now I have to get rid of this off of my email, guys. Like, you can't send this to me.
Yes. And I have clients sending them to like some random personal email of mine that they found on the internet.
Oh gosh.
And it's like, so I use O365 as my email provider, and certain features of that, have some HIPAA features, I'll just say. Not all of them, but some of them do, because you have to do it by service, not by O365. And if they're sharing sensitive information, first, I don't want them to send it. I want to put it someplace where it's stored in a safe environment that has good security on it. No, you're right. They just email it away, and they'll email it to any random email address. And
Sure.
To be fair, I should also pick on IT people who do this all the time as well.
No, that's right.
Like, literally send me a backup of their point of sale database via email, or in a public Dropbox or an open S3 bucket. Happens
Sure.
all the time.
Right. So now, so I'm curious, right? And maybe I'm jumping in here. So in terms of, the remedy, right? The fix here. So I don't envision myself as a security person, but I at least want to take some rudimentary steps.
Mhm.
Now, so for example, we've drunk the Microsoft Kool-Aid, right? We like it, right? As partners, right? So we're using, OneDrive and, Teams or whatever, right? So we have that, that's kind of, in our control, on so there are some, so like our VMs and whatnot are encrypted. So if I put something in my OneDrive, I share a link, and put a password on it, am I at least doing enough? Is that enough due diligence there for you?
So of course the answer is one big, it depends.
Sure.
But, there are all kinds of ways to share things. So the first I'd point out is, you just said OneDrive, but there's architecturally and in legislation a difference between OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. So OneDrive for Business has, I shouldn't say compliant, because they have the certificate or whatever for HIPAA.
Gotcha.
So definitely not OneDrive, but OneDrive for Business does, because that's all part of the SharePoint infrastructure and everything, right?
Right.
The other is, who are you sending it to? Like, one of the problems about sending links or passwords or whatever is that you don't know where it's going. You don't know how it's getting there, right? So
All the hops in between, right?
if we're on the same tenant in O365 and I send it to you, and the only way you have of getting it is through your O365 AD login that has all the backup of that, then that's safer than just emailing someone the link and then later emailing them the password, hoping the two are never combined.
Sure.
Right. So I can't really answer your hypothetical here. And I'm not a security expert. I just want people to think about data security. But I'm having to deal with this all the time. Like, I recently worked with a client where a global admin reset another global admin's password and sent both the credential and the new global admin password in an email to that person who was 9 time zones away. And he wasn't expecting a password reset. So he wasn't there on the other end. And I could make no case for why that happened that way. Like, I couldn't support it in any way.
Sure. No, that's
Even
right.
if everything was burning down, there are still 1,000 better ways of doing that.
Well, only because I've just gone through privacy training for yet another customer.
Mhm.
They're constantly talking about that the people are the easiest ways to get information, right?
Yep.
You want to know something about an organization, you ask somebody, right?
Yeah. So the other thing, so I have it in here in one of these levels, but basically there's always people involved. So no amount of application security, network security, anything is going to stand up against people. And there's this classic cartoon out there, and now I've forgotten who the author of it is, but it says, like, in this corner we have VPN, security, encryption, and in this corner we have Dave, who is the user. and I always think of Dave, and we like to think of them as stupid end users, but we in IT make these mistakes all the time. So the other day, what did I do? I was sending someone some test data that had test credit card numbers in them, because if you work on point of sale, there are these fake credit card numbers that you can use that will actually authenticate but not make any charges. And you use those in your test systems. And I, in my mind, this is all fake data. So I'll just send these 5 rows in a spreadsheet so that they'll have the test credit card numbers. And wouldn't you know, it was great. O365 said, hey, this has got sensitive data in it. We're not sending it. And I'm like, yay, even though I'm pissed off now.
Yeah, right. You're blocking. I have an impediment. My next stand-up, I know what I'm going to talk about.
Exactly. So we have this problem that a lot of people put too much confidence, like I am totally a fan of all these automated things and threat protections, defenders, Azure, all of that stuff. Never discount the fact that we are the person doing something that the tools were meant to protect from. Right.
Right.
One of the other things, since you talked about how we serve these things. So my belief, my most contentious belief in here, my position is that data security and privacy protection should always start as close as possible to the data. So that says to me that if I can apply that security and privacy protection in the actual database, that's where I want it to be. And the reason this is contentious is application developers want all the security and privacy protection to be in the application. My position is you don't always know that that application is the only way that data is going to be accessed, right? And especially in the days now of self-serve BI, self-serve reporting, analytics, machine learning, if we don't protect that data. So in SQL Server, both Azure DB, Azure SQL DB, what's it called now? Azure DB, I think. Azure SQL, that's what it is.
Azure
It's
SQL
changed its name.
database.
Azure SQL and in SQL Server on-prem, we have these features like data masking, which is not a security thing. Data masking applies a mask to data, like the most well-known one is change the credit card number to all X's except for the last 4, because the last 4 digits are the least meaningful. It allows you to specify that mask in the database, on the column where credit card numbers might be stored, and then anything that retrieves that data that does not have the rights to see unmasked data only ever gets the masked data back. The reason I don't consider this a security feature is that the data in the database persisted is still unmasked, right? It's not encryption, it's just masking. As a data architect, I love this because in theory, I'm the expert in the data, like at the column level. I know what valid values are, I know the rules for it, and I know how it needs to be masked, especially in this particular case, that data masking is in your agreement with your merchant account, with the financial institution that you process your credit cards with. So the rule is all but the last 4. You try to mask that data any other way, you're in violation of PCI and your contract with your payment processor.
Oh gosh.
And so I get to specify that in the database, and then no developer has to go figure this out. No analyst has to go figure it out. The other reason I like data masking is it's applied at the very end of the query, like just at presentation time. So it doesn't impact performance in any significant way. It's just an output thing. It's masked on output. So I like that. And then of course, encryption. And in SQL Server, we have TDE that protects data at rest. We have always encrypted, big fan of it if you can use it, which encrypts it at rest, in motion, and only decrypts it at the very end client. I like that. There's row level security. And for years, I had to develop specs for row level security. So the typical example there is doctors and patients. Doctors shouldn't be able to go just randomly browse through all the sensitive data for all the patients in a hospital. So you say through data, you say this doctor is assigned these patients, they can see their data. And in the past, we had to develop our own in-house stuff. And it was really problematic because there's so many holes in that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, the fact that we have vendor support there now is, I mean, it's a huge deal, right? So it allows everyone to kind of be on the same level, and you can compare notes easier, right? So instead of what might be like, oh, well, you know, your competitor, right? So we don't want it to be doing the same thing you are. It's kind of a standard, and it makes it easier to adopt, I think.
That's right. And again, all the gotchas have been worked through. I shouldn't say all, because there's no absolute like that. Like all of these have holes where they could be abused.
Sure.
Right. So for instance, the data masking, because it only applies at presentation time, it's possible if you allow ad hoc queries against that data, because the query still runs, right? So if you say, show me all the employees with a salary greater than 500,000, it's still going to return all the salaries of the employees with salary greater than 500,000. It's just the 500,000 is going to be masked.
Sure.
So ad hoc queries and data masking are problematic. So that's why you need really good auditing if you have ad hoc queries, which is another feature. So I think people use auditing a lot in databases, but they haven't really thought through, you know, what if a DBA is doing malicious things and then they go delete some of the audit logs as well because they have permissions, or a developer or anything like that.
Right.
Those are like the big things for me in SQL. There's a whole lot of other things in SQL Server, but these are relatively new. Like since most of these came out in 2012, that version of SQL Server. So I think it's fairly new. Not everyone's using them, typically because they've already built their own masking features in an application. But they found out, then they put self-serve like Power BI on top of that and found out the masking isn't there because it's in the application.
Now, I'm curious how you decide, let's see. I feel like snarkiness is on brand for you. Is that fair? Or am I okay? Right. So
it's kind of my profile, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So you might. I feel like you come from the place where like, look, these are my positions. I'm willing to defend it. I can walk into the room. I feel like for a lot of us, and I guess I'm going to the IT, folks, it's like security, and you just feel like this, like, I'm going to lose 2 hours of my life right here, right? Like, And sometimes so I was in a meeting, right? And so, for example, and this is with I don't think they're listening. So with a state agency, and we were trying to identify what was sensitive data, because if it was deemed sensitive, and the criteria for sensitive data was not super great, then it had to go through TDE, and there were some other things, right? Which they didn't, anyway, they ultimately didn't want to do. So they were trying to like find reasons why this wasn't sensitive data, right? Like, and so it can be problematic, I feel like, to be like, hey guys, yes, there's another step we have to take, but it's like, would you rather take this step, or would you rather sit through the auditors, right? And the scrutiny of having your, the director come in and sit in these meetings and be like, hey, how come we didn't figure this out?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's a challenge for a lot of folks, even if you want to do something like that. I mean, you're going to get a lot of the nasty looks, right? Because that's my experience anyway.
It is. And yes, I am the Debbie Downer of every design review, because I review for security and privacy, but as well as data quality. And I'm the one who gets to punch holes in everybody's thoughts about what are the cost, benefit, and risks. And my mantra is every design decision comes down to cost, benefit, and risk, right? So My position is, if I were involved in a data breach, I'd be mortified. But I also know we are all either going to be or have been involved in a data breach, maybe even right now, and we don't even know it.
Sure.
Right? You think about the big US government breach that has been going on, that the actual start of that was in the middle of last year.
Right.
And
Right.
well, some people knew sooner than we did. It's just a big deal now because we know about it.
And it affected so many people, right? It was so widespread, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
But there have been data breaches that affected many more people. I think this one is scarier because of the agencies involved. But one of the things that sort of is a sort of angel and devil thing is that there have been some giant data breaches for the most insanely simple reasons. So right now, for decades, the number one method for a data breach has been SQL injection. And that has been true for decades. We not only know that, we know how to fix it, and it still happens over and over and over again. You can get tools that will interrogate your code to see if it's susceptible to SQL injection. And why almost no one uses those, I don't understand. To me, that's like refusing to use spell check.
Right.
There should just be red squiggly lines under your code saying this is SQL injection vulnerability. So this is why I like, one of my other positions, rants on this, is that you can use Azure services to help you ensure security and privacy without having your applications actually reside in the cloud. Like, I'm a huge cloud fan. I think the cloud is our future. But you could have total on-prem stuff. You can send your SQL Server logs up to SQL Defender, even from on-prem. You can send any logs, right? So what used to be called Advanced Threat Protection, which is now getting rebranded into the Defender, and I can't keep track of the brands.
Right.
But you can now do like highfalutin analytics on your logs to help you get not just the low-hanging fruit stuff, but the really complex things that are going on with the uses of both your on-prem and your cloud stuff. So let's say you're a slow adopter of the cloud, but you are using the cloud for some document stuff, and you're also using it for backups of your SQL Server. So you're doing cloud backups because it meets that test of being offsite. You can now monitor and alert on those files in the cloud and your files on-prem, and get a lot of these advanced features. One of the things I like about the Azure offerings here is you get that, I hate this buzzword, but single pane of glass for looking at a dashboard, using vulnerability checks. There are features in SQL Server on-prem, now in SQL Server Management Studio, for doing data classification, a first guess of what sensitive data you have in either an on-prem or cloud-based database. It can go, there are monitors for monitoring your files in the cloud and just storage. I think one of the things that IT people think is you only use cloud services if you're using cloud products. And I think we're going to see that as a change. I mean, these things are really software as a service, and whether you call that cloud or not, it's still, I don't know. I find a lot of companies have homegrown monitoring and alerting for security, or they've bought a tool, but the tool is specific to networking, or the tool is specific to databases, or the tool is specific to storage.
So it's vertical to the team that it supports.
Yes.
Right?
And then they might have like a common alerting system because it was something they bought when pagers were still a big deal. I just find that we should be also looking to cloud services such as in Azure for protecting even our on-prem things, or helping us do analytics on it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I admit that I had not, fully considered or or think of that frequently enough. I mean, again, you mentioned, cloud services, it was email was like, oh, we'll never do email, right? And everybody's virtually, is put their email in the cloud now, just about. I mean,
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, yeah, what else can we do? Like, here's a need, that we have, right? How can we use the cloud to, for our benefit?
Yep.
And that I think that's a really good use case.
Right. And the other thing is, the other classic feature is who's monitoring your monitoring system, right? And then who's monitoring that monitoring of your monitoring system? At least if you're using software as a service that's off-site, you hope that Microsoft is monitoring their monitoring service, that, that they're doing threat detection on their threat detection system and everything. Something that, like, we've all had those stories where systems were down, but IT didn't know because their monitoring system was down or their alerting system was down. And we learned that maybe you should just alert yourself every Monday to see if your alert system's still working.
Is up. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other topics that comes up that I hear a lot, and I have a presentation on blockchain for the data professional, is that blockchain's this huge buzzword right now. But it has some, like, part of its main feature is trust, right? Can you trust the data? And so it's an important part of security and privacy because they're intertwined, of how do you know if this data has been changed? And today in pre-blockchain worlds, we had audit logs, we had security we put on it. But as I said, it's hard to have audit logs when the people who maintain the audit logs have to have rights to update the audit logs. So blockchain will tell you if data has been messed with, like the chain breaks. So I won't get into my whole presentation here. But I find that a lot of IT people see blockchain as just a Bitcoin thing, or just a nefarious tech, or just for buying questionable things on the internet or whatever. But we've already seen, like, Oracle has come out with blockchain tables in their databases. So I think we'll start seeing more blockchain happening in discussions about data protection, because, if you implement blockchain for certain uses, like blockchain doesn't solve every problem. First of all, if I record a transaction that I gave you $1 million, but I only gave you one, blockchain's going to say she gave you $1 million. Like, it's going to confirm that this data was recorded. Now, if you go in and change it to $1, then I'll know that you messed with the data. So it's not, and it's not a technical solution to the trust problem. It just solves this one layer of the trust problem, is if you're reporting this transaction, how do I know that someone didn't change it along the way?
Right.
So I think data people should start learning about blockchain.
So you've recommended it. So now I feel I feel like it is at least approached my world, right?
Yeah.
You're in my orbit, right? In my world, you're my orbit. Because I always felt that it was like way out there. And I'm like, that's great, right? You go do that. Like, until there are programs, until SQL Server tells me that, hey, I can do blockchain, then I'm like, I don't really care, right? Like,
Yeah, and I mean, so Oracle has this as it's called a blockchain table, and it does provides this certain feature, and the data is encrypted, and the hashes are not only stored there, but also separately in a separate storage system. So even if you were able to update both the data and the hash and patch the chain together, the backup of it, you can issue like a validation command, and it'll go check that other data and say, nope, someone's messed with it. So I think we'll start seeing more of that stuff. But this leads me to another assertion, that all of these tools that we've talked about and all of these features aren't going to totally provide security. Like, it still comes down to Dave in this corner or Susan, just there's, like, the weakest link is the people. And if we could just, engineer out the people, the systems could just go use all the data and do all the work. But until we get fully automated systems where there are no people involved in the design or deployment or use of the data, I think we're kind of stuck with security being just several layers, starting at the data, going all the way through. And then one of the greatest myths I think I read about is if we could just educate the end users, then our data would be safe. And I still want us to educate our end users, but we are all Dave. Like we are all of them. Like if you've ever put the wrong person in an email because you were thinking about them, or you typed the wrong Dave or the wrong Lopez or whatever, it's just like, it requires all of these things. And I find people that have one solution are the biggest risk on my teams. So I'm a project manager for the most part for the last 10 years, and I specialize in troubled projects. Troubled projects means projects that are straining to get into production and might have been trying to get into production for several years. And so I don't just mean the way people define, and say 70% of projects fail or any of that. I'm talking about people who committed to a deadline and now are getting penalized $1 million a month until they deliver, and they still can't deliver it. That was one of my projects. I didn't sleep much then, but
yeah, I bet.
So I see all the anti-patterns in the world of bad design, of bad approaches, of onerous methodologies, of no methodologies. So it's all agile, even though it's not. It's just everyone does whatever they want. And like for me, one of the biggest security myths in agile is everyone is an expert in everything. So what they say is no specialists allowed. But to me, the other way of describing no specialists allowed is that you think everyone's a specialist in everything. And I mean, I'm here talking about security because it's an interest of mine and it's a recent interest, but I think I know 1% of what I need to know about security. And to think that everyone on a team could fully design the security of a large, massively distributed cloud hybrid blockchain system, I just don't see it.
Right.
I can't do it. No one person could do that. We need specialists in real enterprise systems.
Yeah, that's fair. And so, so those folks, I guess that's another episode. We've talked about this in the past, right? Sometimes those specialists tend to be a little bit, it's kind of like, here's your meat, and you run as fast as you can. Like, here's my request, and then you run away.
Yeah, there's all that.
All kinds of kinds, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at my list, and I think because I didn't number them, I think I've made it through most of them. So one of my other contentious things is,
here we go.
Data security and privacy are also features of data quality and vice versa. So most of the people I work with in IT, I'm the only one, like everyone else is being beaten to death about performance. Like on my projects, I'm saying we have to use encryption here because it's nearly required by law. And someone's going, but if we encrypt that column, we have to make it 10 times as wide, and that will impact performance and the size of our indexes and yada, 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 right? And I'm like, so 20 years ago, the answer would be, we're not encrypting that data because it'll impact performance. These days, I tell people, you have to remember about ROI. So ROI isn't just return on investment, it's risk of incarceration. It's not usually in your job description to keep your CIO and your CEO out of jail, not usually, but I think these days everyone should assume it is. And I'm only half being snarky there. Like, we haven't seen a lot of CEOs or CIOs go to jail, but that is a provision of GDPR, right? That you could possibly get criminal charges. Whether a wealthy CEO will go to actual prison, I have no idea. But it might be you, the designer, who said, we can't put encryption there because it'll impact performance, right? Your CEO is going to turf you. Like we saw in some congressional hearings where CEOs threw the IT guy completely under the bus because data was breached.
Sure.
And then the last one was
well, and I think forgive me, just
so, no, go ahead.
A thought there, because is that is potentially an opportunity. Now, granted, there's a risk reward kind of a thing, but if you're looking for an area to go into, right, being able to understand how you can implement some of those things, and becoming I don't want to say the security person, right, because you tend to think of that as like audit, and like they're in charge of security, but in terms of you're already working with data. And you're now, okay, well, now how can we implement some of these encryption pieces, right? And still have the data performant, right? That's kind of a niche, right? That you can then specialize in, and people will come to you, right? And that's something you can build the brand around.
Absolutely.
I don't want to say easily, right? But there's generally an opening, right? Like that you can fill the void, right?
That's right. And part of my ways of doing that, like I'm got this little sliver where I'm thinking about data protection, and specifically in the Microsoft field, and specifically in Azure and SQL Server. Like that's such a tiny percent. And even then I feel overwhelmed. So in the new year, which is like hours away, I'm going to start doing like 100 hours or 100 days of code type blog series where I write not about coding, but about things I'm learning about Azure Microsoft security. So I invite people to join me on that, because my last point, which you made a great segue into, is that security is everyone's job. So many people tell me, well, the security guy said it was okay. Yes, but the security guy doesn't know about the internals of SQL Server. The security gal doesn't know. Like they do policy strategy are usually audits and reviews, but at this mile high level, they don't know typically the difference between TDE, always encrypted, and Windows encryption. Like they're not going to know the cost, benefit, and risks of those. That's our job. They might tell us, yes, this data needs to be encrypted, but they're not going to tell you how, usually.
Right.
They might have established a policy with IT to say these are our best practices, or our ROI practices to keep the security guy and the CIO out of jail, but that's it. So I think I made it through all 10 of those.
Hey, there you go.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I'll just say again, so I don't consider myself the security person, but having to start to dabble into these security pieces. Again, I think it is much more, I'm going to use the word straightforward than it has been in the past.
Oh, yeah.
I won't say easy, right? But at least the concepts, you get the concepts down. Implementation is straightforward. Yeah, and I'll leave it at that. So I feel like it's approachable, right? If you can figure out how to do, availability groups or, or whatnot, right? You can figure out how to do the security pieces.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want everyone to understand the cost, benefit, and risks. Like if you're in a meeting and someone says, like an expert consultant who just wants to get their work done says, oh, don't worry, we have TDE that'll cover us. You need to be able to know, well, what about a man in the middle attack? What about this or that? What about our backups? Are our backups encrypted? Are they air gapped?
Sure.
Like to me, these are what not just one person has that knowledge of. Like DBA should have this knowledge because I think they're supposed to be our SQL Server expert. Maybe they also need to know about that MongoDB we have because we're sharing data back and forth with it, or we're using an external table or something like that.
Yep. Okay, so Karen, you'll forgive me. We appreciate the conversation. We're glad we were able to get through all 10 of those. We would like to do some SQL Family, and I feel horrible, right? Because I'm actually the one who needs to leave for a change, which is not normal, but we would still like to do SQL Family. So we're going to give you to these rapid fire style.
I will do it. Yeah.
There we go. So how did you first get started with SQL Server?
I was a data modeler on a project and they used SQL Server and I had to learn it to design for it.
There you go.
Nice.
Now, what advice would you give to someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
Don't do it. No, I love my career. I'm one of those rare people that graduated from university from a program that specialized in databases and data stuff, and I've stuck to it into 3 decades. So I would say have a hunger, a passion, and a desire to learn more, because the cloud has changed how we learn. I didn't have a mainframe in my basement when I was learning database stuff. Now I can go fire up a Cassandra database or a Cosmos DB, and in 15 minutes, I'm playing with it.
Right. That's fair. Now, what's one thing that can instantly make your day better?
Someone telling me they brought me coffee.
Hey, there we go.
That's like the best start of a day.
You have $10,000. What computer tech would you purchase?
Oh, wow. I have so much that I've ever bought. I'm going to say a really cool AV system set up for doing podcasts and video, and an assistant to work it all.
There we go. You were talking beforehand about going through the OBS stuff, and it can be a little bit of a pain. So
yeah,
I hear that.
Maybe a Peloton as well. Okay.
Hey, there we go. It's only $10,000. I think the Peloton alone will get it. Now, which famous person in history would you like to spend the day with?
This was so hard, and I just had to pick any of the women who worked at NASA who were the first to do something. So if I had to name one, it would be Sally Ride, but the women like the Hidden Figures women or the programmers, any of that stuff, I would love to spend time with them talking about what it was like.
Yeah, there we go. We should just plugged Mary Jackson on National Hero Day, which was Tuesday, I believe.
Perfect.
So, let's see. Okay, our last question for you today is, what is your favorite ice cream topping?
Salted caramel.
Oh, here we go.
I don't really have a sweet tooth, but so anything salty and spicy. So that would be on top of a Mexican chocolate ice cream with chilies and cinnamon and chocolate, dark chocolate. That would be my favorite combination.
That'd be your favorite combination. Okay. Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, awesome. Karen, thank you so much for being with us today. We do appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to my rants.
No, they're good stuff. And we would love to have you back. I'm going to go ahead and I'd love to invite you. You said you're going to do 100 days.
Yeah.
Can we plan? Would you put us on your, you pencil us in for,
oh, that would be great.
When we get through the 100 days, let's come back and let's talk. I'll make more time next time. And we'll talk about your 100 days.
I think that sounds great.
There you go. Now, if folks want to reach out to you on social media, how do they do so?
I'm Data Chick on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram with that, but I mostly tweet. I have more than 120,000 tweets, and Twitter lost 20,000 of them, and nobody noticed. So I tweet a lot.
As a data security person, not happy, right?
It's okay. They're cool. And then I blog at datamodel.com is my blog.
There we go. And then our quiet folks, Mr. Eugene.
Oh, yeah. You can find me on Twitter at SQLgene, and I blog at SQLgene.com.
Mr. Kevin.
My email address was masked in the database. When you unmask it, you find out it was just a mask the whole time.
There you go. You have to do a bunch of if statements or, where statements, to get Kevin's email out. Okay, compañeros, that's going to do it for today's episode. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I am at Carlos L. Chacon. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. Happy New Year, everybody. Here's hoping that 2021 is better than the one that we just left. So, awesome. And we hope to see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.